A big hearty congratulations to TA for getting such an amazing gathering together. I think it's probably the biggest in the world at the moment. So well done, and well done to all of you for coming along. It's gratifying to see that we do still have an industry that's vibrant and ready to go. When we, if we rewind the clock to say last June, 12 months ago, I think back then, and we were probably most of us in lockdown at that stage, lock-up, we looked ahead and we thought, okay, this is bad, but you know, by Christmas things should be okay. And of course they weren't. And little did we think that 12 months down the road, we'd still be very much a hermit kingdom, for want of a better expression. I think there are lots of better ones, because I personally don't see it that way. I think it's very important for us to be opening up, but having gone through what we've gone through, to be sensible and serious about it. And that, I think in a lot of ways we're doing the right thing. But the key thing I think we all probably recognise is that COVID isn't going to finish. The sun's not suddenly going to come out and everything will be the same again. I think in that context, sort of think of Melbourne weather. It's going to be more like that. It's going to be, and our friends in Melbourne, sorry about that, but you'll agree with me, I'm sure. I think one of the interesting things that we really do want to look at, particularly for inbound, is what are the criteria for re-entry, for people coming back into Australia, for tourism coming in? And obviously we want to know about going out. What are the criteria, and what are the likely countries, first of all, who are going to be receptive to at least a bilateral? And obviously New Zealand is there. We've talked about Fiji, and of course Fiji's having its own little struggle at the moment. So it is very, very fragile. Our biggest inbound market, of course, China is not going to move, it looks like, until probably well after the Winter Olympics. So we're talking about middle of next year before China starts coming back. They don't want to rock the boat any more than we do. And they're having their own little outbreak at the moment in Guangzhou. So it is fragile. The Americans seem to be getting there. The Brits are getting there, more or less, in terms of our larger markets. And obviously New Zealand, I think, is going to be our main international inbound and outbound destination. But as I think we've all recognised now, one of the key things to the reopening, because COVID's not going to go away, is vaccinations. Now, I'm really happy to say, because I'm about 30 years older than anybody else in this room, that I've had both my vaccinations. So I'm really feeling quite confident. But I'd just like to ask, how many of you here, with a show of hands if you don't mind, has actually had at least one vaccination? That's good. That's good. Well done. And of those who haven't had the vaccination, how many want to have it as quickly as possible? Oh, go you good things. You're obviously in the travel industry. But if there's anybody on your table who hasn't put their hand up, put the hard word on them quickly. I mean, it's not a religion, it's actually vital. If we want to open up, we've got to be vaccinated. It's not just us opening up, it's if we want to go anywhere, we've got to be in a position where we can negotiate on equal vaccination levels. So it is key, I think. There's nothing more important at the moment. And I understand that it is actually a lot easier to get vaccinated if you want. Just avoid the online and go direct. So it's happening pretty fast. Right, that's enough from me. You want to hear from our expert panel. Sorry, had you standing down there. Let me introduce them to you. And you've seen many of them before, I'm sure. Let me bring up the airports first. Jeff Colbert, who's CEO of Sydney Airport. Jeff, welcome. Geert-Jan de Graaf, who's CEO of Brisbane Airport. Geert-Jan. From CAPA, Rakesh Rakar, General Manager, Regional General Manager. Saving the best till last, don't worry. Barry Brown, he's the good-looking one there, who's is it Divisional VP Asia for Emirates, Barry. And I did save the best till last, Claire Black, who's Delta's Regional Sales Manager, Asia Pacific. Welcome. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks, Stephen.
I'm going to sit here. And now we've got fairly limited time. And I know it's getting in the way of your eating to some extent. Just sort of look at it as one extra course, if you can think of it in those terms, because it should be hopefully quite interesting. What I want to kick off with really is sort of how do we plan from what is effectively a zero base? We're starting really with no reference points anymore. The world is beginning again in terms of international travel. How do we plan? So I might ask the airlines that first. Claire, perhaps, is that something you'd like to take on? I mean, what's the thinking back in Atlanta?
Yeah, I think we've been planning for the last 12 months of how we're all going to return to travel. And certainly Delta has maximised those airports being a little quieter than what they have been in the past to expedite a number of our airport terminal builds. And so that ultimately will be a great result for the customer when they do start travelling again, because they'll be going through airports like Los Angeles, New York and Salt Lake City, where these airport builds probably weren't due to finish until the latter half of 2025, 2026, and they've all been accelerated a good 6, 12, 18 months ahead of schedule. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one way that we've been able to prepare for when that travel returns.
Right. Which, I mean, jumping the gun a little bit, but I know there's a lot of talk about America opening up to the UK this summer, this northern summer, largely on the basis of sort of dual vaccination. Can I ask you now, what does Australia look like?
What I would really love for Australia, so glad you brought this up, Peter, is quarantine-free flying, or how do we treat those that have been vaccinated differently? And something that Delta did very successfully towards the end of last year was we worked collaboratively with the governments in Italy and the Netherlands, and as well as the airports in Rome and Amsterdam, and we were able to implement quarantine-free flights, where people didn't have to quarantine in a hotel upon arrival at their destination. And we have the statistics that prove that these travellers can fly without spreading COVID, because you have multiple checks in place prior to departure, even at the boarding gate before you board the aircraft, checking again on arrival at your destination, and multiple days after you've been at your destination. And I think that can show that there is a way that we could open up and lessen these travel restrictions if we were to entertain something like that.
Yeah, that's the practical side of it. I think that it's the health policy side that might be a bit more difficult.
Convincing the government.
Convincing the governments, yeah, at all levels.
Yeah.
Barry, I mean, Emirates has been operating fairly actively still with lower frequency, obviously, into Australia, and with lower load factors, passenger load factors, by a substantial amount. Where do you start planning from the Australian end looking out, but also from an Emirates point of view?
Well, I'll give you the global look first, because we're back to 120 destinations worldwide at the moment, but with a lot less frequency. So we've restarted where we fly to, but we're at the behest of governments. Opening, closing borders is difficult for us. When we look to Australia, we're at the 4 gateway cities now, the major gateway cities, and we've got aspirations to go back to Adelaide when things return to normal, but we're at 11 flights a week.
When things return to normal?
When things return to normal. But we're at 11 flights a week now, and that's down from the heady days of 100 services per week into Australia. The difficulty that we've got is that we have to map forward our schedule capacity when we increase it into the country. We've just taken a decision now to reduce the 4 extra services we had planned for July because the capacity is not opening up for us. We're still at 25 passengers inbound into Melbourne. Sydney is somewhere between 25 and 40. Brisbane is a little bit more than that, but Victoria is stuck in yesteryear. So you can't just introduce a flight if the government says we're going to open the restrictions for you. So you have to plan. So out of those 4 services that we've just announced we're not going to fly in July, we only sold to a capacity limit there of 40 passengers per flight, but that's another 160 people per week that we have to accommodate on flights that are already full. Now, these are vulnerable Australians, and we're doing our best to get them back, but we're restricted by the governments and border closures, which happens on a whim.
Looking forward though, Barry, what's going to change this scenario?
Oh,
Sorry, just accept the applause first.
I don't get it very often, so thank you. Oh, it's my mother. Thanks, Mum. It's difficult. So we've had to take a decision now because the complications are not just putting a flight back on. When you realise what COVID has done to us, we've had to retrench pilots, we've had to furlough pilots, and we've got a lot of 380s parked in the desert. Now, we want to bring those back, and I've actually put them into the system for December, January this year on Sydney and Melbourne, not Brisbane, I'm sorry, at this stage, or into Perth. And we want that capacity to come back, but we have to retrain our pilots. So this takes 4 or 5 months in advance to get the pilots up to speed again, get their hours, get their currency going with their certification. So we're going to bring them in, we're going to be paying them, and if we have to cancel those flights, that's another slug that we've got, because we didn't get JobKeeper here as well. So we kept flying right throughout this pandemic on reduced services, but it's very hard to make the accountants very happy.
Rakesh, CAPA obviously is doing it tough with a very small domestic market, which I say jokingly, facetiously. What are the issues for you? I mean, Hong Kong has managed to control the virus fairly well, although you've had some recent lockdown. How do you see the prospects of getting back into Australia in a commercial way, and what are going to be the preconditions?
When you look at Australia, pre-pandemic, we were operating about 72 flights per week, and I think our worst was just 1 flight per week in all of Australia. But from that on, I think we get a sense that we bottomed out and now slowly started to building back in. We're now operating 13 flights and across 4 airports in Australia. So it's 7 per week in Sydney, 4 a week in Melbourne, and 1 each in Brisbane and 1 in Perth. That said, the restrictions and what the passengers are looking for is certainty, and airlines are also looking at certainty, especially as Barry made a good point. There's a lead time for us to bring back and start operating, but if we don't have that certainty or a framework, when that would be, in what form, shape, and so on, it makes it difficult. Yeah, so if you look at it, the restrictions we are able to bring in about 25, 28 passengers per flight. We're talking about a 350 with about 280 passengers can come in, but then restricted to about 28. So while this restrictions are on, I think we'll be looking at building it very, very slowly.
Yeah, it's something of a circular requirement, a chicken and egg requirement, isn't it? What's going to give the passengers the confidence to book and to fly? It's going to be the governments having the confidence to allow them to do it, and what's going to break that circle. Looking at the airports, I mean, starting from you at the end, Jeff, with Sydney, very, very heavy reliance on international as an operation. You've had to go through massive contortions, and you can't do an awful lot about beginning flying again because you're at the receiving end of these things. What sort of changes have you had to make, and what, from your active role in the policy side of things, what do you see as being the key criteria for getting Sydney Airport operating effectively again?
Yeah. The first thing I want to say before I answer the question is just to comment on how great it is to see so many people in the room together. Anyone who says that business travel is dead needs to look at this room and try doing this over Zoom, right? So this is just a great endorsement of why we have a lot of confidence in the future of travel. The last 12 months has been horrendous. 75% of our revenue and business is tied to international. Domestic recovery is strong, but we really need international to start again. We've gone through a lot of contortions. Every day there's a new health requirement that gets rolled out that we have to meet inside the airport. What we've done is we've reconfigured the international terminal so we have the green zone and the red zone. And the flights from New Zealand go through the green zone and all the other flights go through the red zone. That's worked extremely well. We've been running the one-way New Zealand bubble now since October and the two-way bubble since April, and it's worked really smoothly. But that's not sustainable for the long term, because as we start to see international travel come back, we have to have enough capacity in the green zone to be able to meet that demand. And so we're going to have to work out how we manage red zone, green zone over the long term. But for now, it's working, and we'll continue to make it work. New South Wales has handled over 50% of the repatriating customers over the past 12 months. So New South Wales has done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of getting Aussies home, and they've all come through Sydney Airport without a single issue. So I'm incredibly proud of the work that the team have done to make this work. But what we really want to see is the international border open, and it all comes back to the vaccine, Peter. You know, I've done advocacy 100 different ways with government over the past 12 months, and where I land right now is that the international border will not open until we get the vaccine rolled out to a large percentage of the population. And so everything that we can do as a business to encourage people to get vaccinated, to get those vaccine numbers up, is going to be the best thing for all of us, because I just don't see a scenario where the government's going to open up the border without a high percentage of the Australian population having been vaccinated.
Yeah, so in case the message didn't get across, it is a race. So race down and get your vaccinations. It's going to make a big difference to opening up and inbound. Jan, Brisbane too. I mean, you suffered probably more than Sydney because Queensland was closed for so long to pretty much everybody. How are you coping with the situation, and what are your aspirations?
I think, to be honest, Peter, we're all in the same boat from that perspective. And of course, the last 18 months have been very tough. We were probably a little bit lucky that we had a very strong intrastate network that almost continued throughout the whole period. So that at least kept us busy and kept the lights on. So from that perspective, we were reasonably well off. Of course, with the opening up the interstate borders, and hopefully we can keep them open in the future, the recovery in the domestic terminal was quite good, up to 70 to 75% of pre-COVID levels in the last few weeks before the Victoria lockdown again. So therefore, I'm fairly confident that throughout this year, up until the end of the year, we might recover to maybe 80, 85% compared to pre-COVID levels. And we will never get to the 100% because a lot of our domestic travelers are obviously international travelers with through connections. So that's the reason why I'm very pleased if we reach that 80, 85%. But I'm like Jeff, for us it's all about international. That's where we make our money, and that's why we're working closely together with the airlines and with the other airports and the Australian government to see what we can do to speed up opening borders. Besides that, I totally agree with Jeff that it's completely dependent on the vaccination rollout and the uptake of that. At the same time, I think it's very important, like they did in the US and in the UK, to build different levels of protection and different levels of risk mitigation. And therefore, we need to collect data. And we're very keen to work with everyone to make sure we build up that data and see what actually works. In conjunction with vaccination, do we need pre- and post-flight testing, for example? Does it really work out? Can we? Because the most important thing is that we need to get rid of the quarantine system as we know it today, because that will prevent people to travel to Australia, because that's a big no-no for, I think, all travellers but VFR.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of passenger confidence or potential passenger confidence, there are the two levels to it. One is obviously feeling safe being in an airport and in an aeroplane, but also this uncertainty about the borders reopening or reclosing and reopening. What are you hearing from the people who are going through the airport and who are not going through the airport about those confidence levels? How do you break that cycle?
I think, Peter, what we hear and what we get out of our surveys is that domestic passengers are increasingly confident to travel. The lockdowns are probably the biggest risk for people, and therefore bookings are made very late. But in general terms, when people are deciding to travel, they're comfortable with going through the airport process as well as during the flight. The airlines are doing everything possible to keep people safe there. So I think that process works really well. From an international perspective, obviously, there's a little bit more risk, and we see that in Trans-Tasman. Especially New Zealanders are quite hesitant to travel to Australia right now, and that's completely related to the fact that they're afraid to end up here, being stuck, and maybe have to be repatriated in the end. But the journey as such, there's increased confidence with travelers to embark on the trip.
Yeah, people aren't worried about getting on a plane or going to the airport. People are worried about the fact that they're going to get locked out of their home state when they go. Or they don't want to book a holiday interstate because it might get cancelled 2 days before they leave, and they can't find any accommodation in their own state and their holiday plans are killed. So keeping the borders open is absolutely critical. I've been advocating from day one that there's no justification for closing, for widespread border closures on a state-based level. I'm fully vaccinated, and I can't go to Melbourne. I had my mum's 80th birthday last week, couldn't go down. Right? So I can't even exercise my own freedom of choice to go down there as someone who's fully vaccinated. The same will apply when we get the international border open. I don't see a scenario where the international airlines are going to dedicate services to Australia where the international border might close and open, because they can't run profitable route networks that way. And so they'll choose to fly to places where they can have consistency and build a following. So getting the border open and keeping the border open is absolutely critical to the survival of our industry.
I think that said, though, it obviously, yeah, let's hear it. I think we're all on that same page. But I think also there is an underlying concern among passengers that there is a safe environment that we're travelling through.
No doubt.
Airports and aircraft. Let's switch the topic. Let's go back to the airlines. Switch the topic around, particularly for this market too. The profile of travellers who are going to come back first. I mean, I think we all have talked about the likelihood that business travel will be slow to come back. And I'm interested on the Tasman, for example, to hear that a lot of companies are actually worried about duty of care in terms of bringing business back on the Tasman, and even with an open market and no quarantine. We're not going to have much business traffic initially. Claire, I mean, America is different. The country has taken a very much more cavalier approach to which frankly I think is insane, but then we're very different in lots of ways. As Churchill said, two nations divided by a common language. But what do you see coming back? I mean, VFR is a key one necessarily.
VFR, absolutely. And we are, as we head into the third quarter of this year, if you look at North America or the US, we are starting to see the corporates come back. Delta is one of many companies in the US where our head office is reopened. Everyone's back in the workplace, and most people are vaccinated, and people are travelling freely. I mean, we're operating, pre-COVID, we operated 5,500 flights a day. We're now operating 4,500. So, we're getting there, and flights are full. I mean, we had a policy where we were blocking middle seats, and we were doing that not because there was really any health or safety benefit to that. We were doing that to help instill customer confidence. Yeah. And now that confidence is back and our planes are full and everyone's travelling, whether it be for family, and as I said, corporate travel will definitely be back in the US domestically by third quarter.
By third quarter, I mean, it's still down about 75% though, isn't it?
It'll still be down. Yeah, I mean, as I said, we're 1,000 flights less a day than what we were flying, but we're cash positive. We were losing a lot of money March last year, 100 million a day. I mean, we all were. But we're now back in a position where we're cash positive daily.
Right. Yeah. Barry, I mean, your business obviously depends very largely on business travel. You're a premium carrier in lots of ways. What do you see the profile of returning travellers?
See, I disagree with you. I agree with Claire and also what Jeff said. I think business travel...
We've never disagreed before.
Well, that's true. That's true. Apart with my mother. But I think business travel will rebound. There's a pent-up demand, and that applies across all the channels. So you've got leisure, VFR, corporate. We do a lot of, well, I do a lot of community testing, asking people, when do you think you'll travel again? And they say as soon as we can. And I think we're over virtual networking meetings. I mean, I'm over them. I've done hundreds of them in the last year, and I don't want to do any more. That's why I'm happy to be here on a live panel with real people. And that's the litmus test that we're getting when we're canvassing our corporates. I mean, we've still got our salespeople going around. We're preparing for green shoots, and that's why we've taken the decision to put those 380s on at the end of the year. Of course, I'm going to caveat that by saying it's still subject to government opening borders, and it's the one message. I know Jeff's going to Canberra soon, but it's the one message that we should all be carrying: get these borders open. And like you, I'm so pleased to see everyone put their hand up to get a vaccine, because that's the biggest step we need to make as the world, in our market here in Australia and New Zealand, but across the markets. And we need to help the developing world as well. We can't just leave it to the people who can afford to get the vaccines. We need to get this across the world and just get us back opened up again.
Yeah, I think we're getting that message now. Why are we talking business travel? Well, because business travel actually underwrites tourism. So it is critical to long-haul international services. From Cathay's end, I mean, what do you see? Obviously, cargo has been a big one for you, as we mentioned, but what do you see as a passenger profile coming back through your major hub?
Yeah, initially we see a lot of demand being driven by VFR. I mean, families clearly have not visited families for a long time, and they're waiting to get back and visit families. Alongside that, and maybe for this room as well, the leisure component will come back strongly, because people get their freedom back and they want to travel and they want to get back to exploring, which they have not been able to do because of restrictions. Corporate, from an airline perspective, plays a significant role in terms of underwriting profitability, but the sense is that will take some time, be slower than these two segments, but eventually it will come back. It's just a matter of when and in what shape and form, as things start opening up and there's more confidence and there's more certainty, and people feel very safe traveling out again. So that's the way we see it, and therefore we are focusing more on VFR and leisure to begin with, and hoping alongside slowly corporate starts building again. And this is a great example of people desperately wanting to meeting up in person, right?
Yeah.
Makes a big difference.
Yeah, good. Well, good luck, and let's hope it does happen too. Claire mentioned airports and the sort of, obviously the system in the US is different with terminals and so forth, but there's got to be a good relationship between airports and airlines in this. We're all suffering to the same extent. I mean, any good examples of relationships with airports, say in Australia?
Now, you said we've always been friends. I won't be controversial. Let me say that it's a shame that Lyle, Stranby and Melbourne Airport aren't here, and you used an analogy before that I'll draw on with, it's an Olympic year. So I would give them the gold medal.
Why is that, Barry?
Because they've been excellent in helping us. They've understood our problems. You know, we're lucky to cover our direct operating costs here, so we're not contributing to any other costs. So it's been difficult for us. We've had the IFAM, which is the freight assistance mechanism, which has helped us because cargo has been the green shoot for us across the world. But some airports have not been quite as good as Melbourne. And rather than get controversial, because I'm sure Bruce Piper's here.
We'll move on to Claire.
No, I'll give a silver medal to one of them up there, and the other one won't get one.
You're free to ask Barry afterwards. But I really shouldn't have segregated the airports and the airlines, because we are obviously in this together, and it's
We are in together,
together,
Peter, and we took a decision at the start when we realised that COVID was going to be a big deal, that we wanted to try and get as many people through to the other side as we possibly could. So if you're a mum and dad retailer inside Sydney Airport, you haven't paid a cent of rent since COVID hit, because we want to get them through the other side. And some of the most amazing conversations I've had are with retailers who, when we told them we weren't going to charge them any rent, just burst into tears. because this is their life. This is their own business. Their home is probably mortgaged to the business. And for them, it was a matter of survival or not. We did a lot of rent abatements across the entire airport for property tenants, for retail tenants, and for the airlines. Qantas parked all their planes on the east-west runway for free. We gave significant abatements on all of the airline lounges. We've given close to $250 million of relief to everyone who operates on the airport over the past 12 months. And so we don't feel, at the same time, that we've been losing a lot of money. I sat down with my team and I looked recently and I said, is there any decision that we made over the last 12 months that we regret or would have done differently? And the answer is no. I think that we have banded together as an industry and we've done everything we possibly can to ensure that every single person who touches the airport or the aviation industry gets through to the other side, and we'll continue to do that until we get to the other side of this crisis.
Good, that's good to hear. And I think, it's obviously really important. If we're talking another 12 months, this is what we're talking about seriously before we get any real substantial recovery. You guys have got to be talking to each other in a big way, haven't you? Because you're both going to, it's not as if one's going to go down, the other's going to go up. You're both going to go down together on both sides. Now, look, on that cheery note, I know we have to leave a little bit of time for questions. I'll invite, I think we probably have time for a couple of questions, maybe 3 questions if we can from the audience. So if you'd like to raise your hand, and please try and keep the question very short. This is one of the issues in a big room like this. Everybody's a bit reluctant to put their hand up, aren't they?
Down the very back.
Can we see one? So I think we have them right down the back there, if the mics can pick that up. Yeah, if you'd just like to say who you are and a very quick question, please.
Yes, Neil Hermes from Canberra Guided Tours in Canberra, best destination in Australia. Look, my question's about COVID passports. Where's the COVID identity happening?
Don't know who'd like to take that. It's a messy one at the moment, isn't it? There are lots of different passports. There's no recognition. There's no government agreement on it.
We think we've.
You go there.
We think the IATA travel pass will be the future. I go back and I can remember when I first started travelling back in the 60s as a child. But we had the yellow vaccination pass, which we all carried around with our tuberculosis, our cholera, et cetera, smallpox, whatever. So the IATA travel pass has been trialled. I know that Emirates and many other airlines have trialled this. We've worked it successfully on the UK. We've worked it on Spain. We're talking to other governments around the world with IATA, and I think that will be the future. As long as we're vaccinated and have this IATA travel pass, I see it fast recovery.
I'd like to think it's as simple as that, Barry, because there are lots of competitors. The EU is going to do their own thing, probably. Claire, America's sort of probably at the forefront of this.
We're looking at doing our own, to be honest. We're looking at sort of a one-stop solution where people can schedule the COVID test, they can store their test results as well as other health documents in this app. They can also verify that they've fulfilled all the criteria necessary before they leave for their destination. So we're just looking at finding a one-stop solution.
So is this the US or
This is Delta's own
Delta? So then we may end up with
solution.
multiple.
Correct.
Well, then you've got also, the state of Texas has basically banned anybody requiring vaccinations to fly in there.
Yeah.
So there is that sort of privacy come whatever else issue. Cathay's point of view? What are you saying?
We have trialed travel pass, IATA's travel pass, and at the same time we have trialed the common pass. But our view is may be messy right now a little bit, but as we go forward, there'll be more alignment, more recognition, and the interface will work more smoother as we go along. So I'm not looking at right now, but I'm looking at about 6-8 months down the line. That will be a key enabler to get everyone moving and the government's feeling safe and secure that they have the right information, along with passengers managing to ensure that they've got the privacy of information kept with themselves as well.
It probably needs the EU and the US actually to get together with something, isn't it, to lead the way? Hert-Jan.
Yeah, Peter, if I can say something about it. I think what we learned over the last year and a half is that a lot of the solutions related to our industry, related to travel, were local. It's very much driven by local political interest. And I think that will continue to happen. So I think the first step is that countries, regions will find their own solution first. So for example, in the US, there are already checks. You have to have vaccination before you can travel international. And you have to have a test 72 hours before you fly back. Fantastic. So most of the hotels Americans are traveling to are actually offering those tests in the hotels. So that's how they sort it out. So I think that will happen, and will the same for Australia. I think we will come up with our own solutions that work for us based on the vaccine registration or register we have ourselves. Ultimately, I hope that Barry is right. We can find a global solution that works for all and can be integrated in the airline systems and in the worldwide systems like normal visa, for example, and that will, I think, but that will take some time because of all complex geopolitical things that are involved in that.
So I guess to the extent that a lot of the bilateral bubbles are going to be key, we probably really want our government to be focusing on getting those health agreements in place bilaterally at first, if we want to get inbound coming.
Well, I think all of us, and I think everyone here in the room is aware of the fact that it's vaccination first, but then we need a progressive policy in terms of border openings. We will never be able to achieve a zero-risk situation, so it's all about risk mitigation. And we need to come up with the right solutions for the various dots on the maps we want to connect with Australia. Definitely, that's required. And that's why the airlines and the airports are working closely together with the federal government to see where we see opportunities, whether that's bubbles or green lanes or whatever, but we really need to explore those opportunities, because if we wait too long, we will miss out. Yeah. The rest of the world is traveling again. I was talking about the Americans. They go to Europe this year. They will go on vacation. Airlines will allocate their aircraft to other markets than Australia. We really need to be front runners in all of this. We can't sit on our hands.
Yeah, I think Hertiang made a very, very valid point. For airlines, we've got limited resources. Those limited resources are very expensive resources in terms of aircrafts. I mean, we'll generally follow demand. We'll follow where business begins to open up. US is a great example. I mean, I can already see future planning going on with US being more open in terms of opening its border. And there's a fear, or there's a concern, or there would be an anger of losing out to other countries which are more open and which have got themselves sorted earlier than probably here. That's the concern.
We have to get that balance, though, don't we? We have to make sure. I mean, it's one thing for the industry to want it. It's another thing for the health authorities to be convinced about it. And I think we're finding around the world that there's probably a bit of backtracking from that point of view. That was a really good question. One more, if we've got one. I've got one hand up that I can see down here. Can we get a mic there? Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Taylor from Luna Park, Sydney, and aviation nerd. Quick, it's a two-part question. If there are some gaps going forwards with some of the traditional carriers, is there the potential for some of the new startups that have happened during COVID, perhaps from Southeast Asia, to look at flying into Australia? And secondly, will airports or governments potentially throw some money in to try and capture more business? I mean, we've seen with state of origins what can happen when you throw a bit of money to get some extra business.
Well, let's start with that second part of the question. I mean, is it actually going to be worthwhile for airports to be throwing money at airlines at this stage?
I'll have to start a GoFundMe page to do that, because I don't have a lot of money at the moment. What's really important is that we all band together as an industry. We have gone through the most challenging 12 months that any of us have ever seen as an industry. We need to continue to work together on the advocacy to try and get the borders open and stay open as quickly as possible. And we need to work together on all of the logistics to make sure that that happens in a way that's safe, that gives the travelling public the confidence that they can travel, and it gives the government the confidence that they can open borders and keep them open. So I've seen a level of collaboration in the industry that I hadn't seen before, and it's been wonderful. We've got to keep that going. I'd like to think that we're more than halfway through COVID. If you say COVID started in March last year and we've been at it for 15 months and the international border opens in the middle of the next year at the latest, then we're more than halfway through. But we've got to keep the effort up, we've got to keep the intensity up, we've got to keep the collaboration up. Individual businesses, airports, airlines will make their own decisions around how they incentivise and how they encourage travel back, and we'll do what we think is necessary. But the bigger point for me is ensuring that we just continue to advocate for our industry. There's a dangerous narrative that's emerged that you don't need international travel because the domestic market is so strong. The reality is there's $100 billion of economic value attached to international travel for Australia. We're seeing a significant skills shortage in the country as a consequence of the lack of international travel, and the consequences of keeping the border closed for a prolonged period of time will be felt in a significant way economically as we move further and further through this crisis. So we've got to keep sticking together, keep advocating on the things that really matter, and keep working to try to get those borders open and stay open as quickly as possible.
Andrew.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, we do have to move along fairly quickly because catering for 1,500 people isn't that easy, so we have to think about you and the catering staff. So I think we probably are, unless there's somebody who desperately wants to say something before we close. We are going to have to wrap up there, I'm afraid. And you've been a great, enthusiastic audience. You don't often get applause during a panel session. Thank you for that. But I think just to pick up on what Jeff was saying too, obviously we're all in this together. I think one of the things we do have to, and it is a massively important industry, the Australian economy, but I think we do have to recognise it's not the only thing. We are having really something of an economic revival domestically, and I guess we have to recognise that there is a trade-off there. We don't want to jeopardise what we've done and what we've got to now by opening up too quickly or by not having the right controls in place. And to do that, to get to that stage, we've got to make sure that our governments at each of the levels, political, health and aviation levels too, have got to be on the same page. And I think the more we can, as an industry, we can be lobbying to do that with one voice and vociferously, very loudly, but with one voice, I think that's really going to be necessary, and it's going to make a big difference to getting somewhere in the next 6 to 12 months, hopefully the next 6 months. Thanks to Tourism Australia for putting on a great event like this. I think this is the sort of thing that really does make a difference. I think you'll all agree. Give them a big hand. I mean, this has been a wonderful event, hasn't it?
Thank all of you.
Well done. And with that, I'll let you get back on with your lunch. Thank you very much for accommodating us for this, and hope you've found it interesting. I'm sure the gentleman and lady here will be around to talk to you if you'd like a bit more information. Thank you.